Hello and welcome to our People to People and Frog Recruitment 2025 4th Generation Workforce livestream. I am Kirsty Henegan. I am one of the temporary recruiters over here in Auckland, New Zealand at Frog Recruitment. So on today's show, are your engagement strategies working across every generation? We are joined today by Maja Paleka, founder, speaker, advisor, facilitator, coach at MP Consulting, and Michelle Holland, founder and executive director at Synergy IQ. So we're going to unpack the key trends shaping multi-generational workforce strategies across Australia and New Zealand in 2025. So what we're going to cover today is what's driving change in 2025. Are your leadership strategies working across age groups? Are employers tailoring perks by generation? And are cross-generational exchanges gaining momentum? But first, let's kick things off with a look at what's really happening between different generations in the workforce. Okay, so within the 5 generations working side by side, it's no surprise to us that each group brings its own values, its own preferences, and their own ways of working. So, if we do want to attract and keep top talent, we do need to understand what makes each group tick. So, we'll start off having a look at Generation Z. They are the newest generation to our workforce. However, they are already making up around about 27% of our workforce. So, in terms of what matters most to them, it's no surprise that they are looking for career growth, ongoing training, and working in diverse and inclusive environments. They thrive on feedback, not once a year in a formal review, but regularly, with clear communication and a sense that you're on the right track. And flexibility is a big deal too. So ideally, they're looking for hybrid roles with about 2 days working from home. But obviously, as a business, we need to look at those development opportunities there as well. So when it comes down to how they want to communicate, it's all about speed and clarity. So let's think about tools for instant messaging, and they respond well to managers who check in weekly and recognize their efforts every couple of weeks. For them, regular affirmation and guidance is really helpful just to be able to build their careers early on. We will have a look at our millennials. So they actually make up the largest chunk of our workforce with about 35%. So they do share some of the same preferences as our Gen Zs, but they do have a slightly different outlook. So they are big on work-life balance, fair pay, and having clear opportunities to grow. So they do tend to want a little bit more autonomy than your Gen Zs. They often opt for 2 to 3 days of remote work, and they may not need quite as much hands-on support. So they still benefit from that regular engagement and a check-in every week or two with recognition every 2 to 3 weeks, keep them motivated, keep them connected. Communication-wise, they're happy with a mix of email, messaging, but the key there is consistency. And then we move on to our more experienced generations. So we have our Gen X and baby boomers. Gen Xers, who also make up about 27% of the workforce, they do value their stability and their job security. They're often looking for more of that meaningful work and flexibility, but perhaps more in terms of managing their own time and their own responsibility. In their workload, and they do prefer more of that traditional communication, so more of that email, face-to-face connection, and they do tend to be comfortable with more of your bi-weekly check-ins and monthly recognition. And then that takes us on to our baby boomers. So they only make up about 11% of the workforce now. Generally, they are more focused on things like purpose, loyalty, and trust in leadership. They've seen a lot. They have a lot of experience, and many now are in mentoring and leadership roles. So they're also a bit more comfortable with traditional ways of working. Don't necessarily need that frequent feedback, but they do appreciate consistency and being kept in the loop. So what does it all mean? So there's no one size fits all approach. The more we understand about the different generation nuances, the better we can adapt to our workplaces. We're able to create environments where everyone can feel valued, supported, and empowered to do their best work. So all of the insights we've just covered and the ones we'll be diving into shortly come straight from our brand new 2025 Employment Salary Trend Report. The report is packed with insights gathered from thousands of job seekers and employers across Australia, New Zealand, and the UK. It takes a close look at what's really happening in the job market, from hiring patterns, workplace expectations, to people and what they're going to be looking for in their next role. If you're keen to dig a little bit deeper into salary benchmarks, benefits, what's trending in your market, you can get your own copy. All you need to do is scan the QR code on the screen at any time during today's session, or you can click the link in the comments, whichever's easier for you. So, to break down more about what is happening in the market, we are joined first today by Maja Paleka of MP Consulting. Maja is a globally experienced consultant, coach, and speaker shaping the future of work with a background in engineering and leadership roles across 3 continents. Hello. She blends technical precision with human insights to drive meaningful workplace evolution. Known for her hands-on approach, Maja supports organizations through both the design and implementation of transformational change. We'll get there. Hi, Maja. Welcome.
Hi, Kirsty. Lovely to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for joining us. So we'll jump into our first question. So data from our 2025 report shows that 49% of HR teams say turnover has improved, yet 48% describe their teams as being under-resourced. So how do you think we can go about keeping people engaged but performing at a high level without risking burnout?
Yeah, it's a $1 million question, isn't it? Or, I don't know, with inflation, should be saying $1 billion question these days. I'm like, it's been around forever. It's such a really interesting thing. I'm always curious about this number that, the turnover has improved, and possibly just even before we answer the question, interesting to think about why do we think that the turnover might have improved? And I think part of the conversation is that we can definitely see that there's a lot more worry about job stability and job safety, I guess, for people. So I guess we just have to be careful thinking that everybody's happy and that's why they're not leaving, right? And therefore they're going to be performing at a high level because they're happy to stay where they are. I think it's a more nuanced conversation that some of the turnover is possibly there because people are just worried about finding another job somewhere else, which then means that we still might have, and we've seen some of the engagement numbers sort of across the world, that engagement is really not doing great across the board. So we do need to put in that effort, and at the same time, people are stretched. So my number one tip really these days, and I think if we're going to put effort and time and investment anywhere, it should be in people managers. I think that people managers, and we can see this, are the highest impact in terms of employee engagement. We know that, and we've known that from multiple decades of research from lots of different side of things. They hold like 70% of the impact of employee engagement. But on the flip side, we also know that people leaders, and when we look at that data, are the most burnt out, the most stressed out demographic inside organizations right now. So my number one tip would be to actually really support your people leaders and get them to get back to the basics. So it's not about making anything more complex and complicated, but you mentioned how people like to be given feedback, and somewhere in that kind of preferences is about a once a week, once every 2 week, one-on-one. What that's going to allow leaders to do is to prioritize severely when they need to, because if we are under-resourced and we have to perform, we're really going to be able to prioritize. We have to be able to keep on top of that engagement with our employees and tailor it depending on the generation as well as to what some of those needs might be. So really I would look at people leaders. I would look at, as I said, those basics in terms of one-on-ones. And then I would say that also, one of the things is we might focus on output, but really looking at what is the overall outcome rather than output that we're trying to do here, and not really just measuring the same old things we've been measuring, but really looking at what do we really want to achieve? What's the overall goal? And is there a smarter, cleverer way to get there? Allowing us to drop some balls along the way, possibly less reporting. What are the things that are really unnecessary? So we, that heavy duty prioritization, really going back to that.
Yeah, nice. No, very, very interesting points. And yeah, definitely interesting around the 70% being within that leadership space. I knew it would be a big impact, but I didn't realize it would be around about that 70%. So moving on to Gen Z now favoring transparent communication, digital first experiences, and then you've got the opposite end where baby boomers are placing more value on stability and in-person interaction. How do you see balancing leadership and engagement approaches across the two groups?
Yeah, it's a really interesting thing. And I think there's definitely, I mean, listen, like everything these days, it's a bit of a yes and conversation, right? I 100% believe that there are some really interesting things we need to think about in terms of differences of preferences. And, we have the Gen Zs, the digital natives. When leaders are communicating to them, they have to realize what some of those preferences are. And so, as a leader, my whole point isn't what I'm saying. The whole point is what is actually being received, right? And the great old adage still applies, right? Communicate, communicate, communicate. And I think I remember learning a rule or being told when I was a leader early in my career is like, you will only maybe start being heard with what the messaging is at the point that you are like so sick and tired of yourself that you want to vomit. Like, next time I have to repeat this message, that's maybe when people are finally hearing you. And that's unfortunate, but it's just part of the job of leadership. So the big thing that I would say is being able to, and again, this goes back to why leaders are burnt out and overwhelmed, is that we have to do it in different ways. So, when it comes to your Gen Z teams, video, short messages, instant messaging, and video that is lo-fi. Like, this is the other thing. Sometimes we think, oh, it has to be beautifully produced and everything else. Actually, if we look at some of the preferences, Gen Z doesn't want it. Like, the more produced it is, the more they're like, nah, let's just look at something a little bit more authentic, I think would be there. And then absolutely knowing your team, right? So if you have some baby boomers and you have some Gen Xers, going back to some of the more traditional ways of communicating. So really it's just, communication being one of the main tools in terms of that engagement is you have to be a bit of a jack of all trades and willing to play and experiment and try different things. Because if not, you are missing out some stuff. I always think of, a CEO of a small fintech startup that we were working with, and he's like, there's nobody here. There's no engagement. What is going on? Because he was just used to buzzy sort of big offices. And the head of engineering is like, have you logged on to Slack? He's like, oh, that's not for me, And he's like, log on to Slack and take a look at the communication and the buzz and the engagement that's happening in there. He was completely missing this whole area of engagement where his people are, and a lot of them were devs and technical people, that was their happy space. So we have to make sure that we play in all these areas, really just paying attention to who's working in our teams.
Yeah, definitely. It just made me think. I was out meeting a client the other day, and they were wondering how to do communication because their workforce is heavily Gen Z, and they were thinking, right, we need to do these videos, we need to make a new app and make it all creative. And they just went out to the workforce and was like, how do you want us to get this out? And they were like, just a newsletter. We don't want another form of communication. There's already so many channels. Yeah. Please don't make us download another app. We don't want that. So sometimes, just actually asking as well, how would you like to receive this can really, really have that impact.
Absolutely.
Sorry, you go.
I was just going to say, what you just said is exactly that. It was going to be my point initially, and I lost it in the beginning, is that for all the differences across generations, there are some things that really kind of we are the same in many ways, because I've done a lot of work, presenting sometimes the Gen Z sort of preferences to baby boomers and Gen Xers, and they're like, but we kind of want the same things. We want to move quickly with our communication. We want to do it. Maybe we'll do it in different tools, but some of the basics are the same. And I think, if you have a multi-generational team, really actually getting the team together, another point of engagement would be getting them together and getting them to connect and talk to each other and seeing each other as human beings, probably your strongest point of engagement. If people connect and they're there for each other and understand these differing point of views and needs, everything else becomes easier.
Yeah, definitely. No, I completely agree. Brilliant. I'm just going to find my next question for you. Here we go. So our data shows that Gen Zs are placing high value on benefits like your mental health support. So they're looking around about 64% are after that mental health support, around about 56% want mentorship. Meanwhile, our Gen X and our baby boomers are more focused on job stability and being recognised for their work. So are employers or any of the clients that you're working with, are they tailoring their benefits based on the generational needs? And if so, what kind of things have you seen and what's been working well in that space?
Yeah. I think the reality, kind of very similar thing is you have to be able to offer variety ultimately. And again, that variety is not just going to help you in terms of generational differences, but I think it's going to help you even within the same generation, some differences that people have. Because, these days we're becoming way more aware about how diverse our workforce is, even within a specific generation, and then that their needs might be different. So whether that's mental health support, the conversation even within the Gen Xers and baby boomers who sometimes would never think through reaching out for some of that support through their employer are now actually starting to see the benefit of reaching out that way. So I would just sort of say is I think the important bit is going back to exactly as you sort of said, is asking the questions. The best practice that I see is employers who are regularly asking the questions, regularly surveying their employees and seeing what is important. And then to a certain degree, having a bit of a benefits marketplace. So it's not saying that you have to spend lots on every single option, but providing a variety, and again, looking for providers in terms of the benefits that might be able to sort of give you I guess, pay-per-use type sort of options. So giving you some of that flexibility. We're seeing, mental health absolutely being a really big one. Any of the well-being side of things being a big things that are being used. But again, even within that, there's a lot of variety. Flexible work. I mean, listen, I get a bit twitchy when we talk about flexible work as being a benefit, because I think it's just a smart way to work rather than a benefit, because benefit in my mind means that we are paying for it. There's a cost to the employer, and they're doing it to sort of just retain their people. Where if you actually look at this, like the studies and the data on flexibility, there's a cost benefit to the employer. So, and from what your data showed, I think, if you're not providing some level of flexibility, even if it's not remote work, you're missing out a really big, important part for your employees. So I would say flexible work, it showed up, I think it's every generation that you said, including the baby boomers. Flexible hours was for them. So some level of flexibility and then variety, but really the ability for people leaders, the managers, to continue to have that conversation and kind of be able to adopt is the other really big thing that I would say in terms of best practice.
Yeah, nice. No, that's really, really great insight. So thank you so much for jumping on and running through those. So I'm going to shift gears slightly now, and I'm going to bring on our second guest for today's update. So we've got Michelle Holland, who is the founder and executive director at Synergy IQ. So Synergy IQ is a change consultancy helping organizations navigate complexity through systems, thinking and sense making. And by aligning strategy with human behavior, they make change manageable, build lasting capability, and deliver real world results. Hi, Michelle.
Hi. Sorry about that. That was a bit of a mouthful, wasn't it?
I know, I was like, well, I'll get this out.
Yeah.
I've got this.
No, I'm really glad to be here. I'm looking forward to this conversation with you.
Thank you so much for joining us. So I'll jump into the first question. So with Gen Z now making up 27% of the workforce that we've seen, and they do prefer those regular check-ins, flexible work, clear communication. How have you seen management and retention strategies adapted to meet these preferences?
Mm. It's such an interesting question because I think looking at the kind of managers we tend to work with, I work a lot with executive teams, so it's usually in that sort of older millennials, Gen Xers, and Boomers. What I've actually noticed the most is the change and shift in conversation that they're actually having. Whereas previously the conversation was all about, how do we get these young people to do what we want them to do? It's really shifting now, and as managers are needing to evolve themselves first to be able to look at how they can manage and retain this different group of people. The other, I think, conversation that I've seen happen, which is exciting for me, is that we're shifting, and it might be a result of this, having lots of different people, different generations, and that conversation is happening, to more talk about diversity overall, and which is, I think, a really exciting thing. So, for an example, we do a workplace program where we talk about the neuroscience behind the impact on change. So we talk about brain chemicals and all this sort of stuff, which is really interesting. And more often than not, in every session, people are asking about, well, what about neurodiverse people? What about the different kind of generations? How are they, responding to change that's happening? Is it the same for them? Is it the same for others? And I think this, to me, is really encouraging, that we're actually having a broader conversation about the different types of people that we've got within the workplace, so that we can start looking very clearly at how do we manage beyond just the individual? How do we manage the workforce, given that there are so many different needs in the workforce? How do we look at it from a systemic point of view, instead of just always looking at how does the individual fit within the system? So I'm seeing a lot more shift in looking at the systems that are being used. So those communication systems, how do we actually talk with people? How do we engage them? How do we do it in a way that's suitable for different types of people? So that's really encouraging for me, is that shift in conversation is actually happening at the executive level and the senior management level. And there is much more focus on the different types of lived experience within the workplace and shaping their organizations to fit that. So I'm starting to get quite encouraged by this.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, because it kind of goes hand in hand with that diversity and inclusion piece. Like, what comes first, the diversity or the inclusion? And it's about
Absolutely.
looking at your ecosystem. And yes, you can bring these people into the workforce, but they're not going to be
Mm,
retained if you're not providing the the environment that they're looking for. So it is really kind of
that's
like
exactly
delving
right.
into these things. So yes, it sounds very exciting. So career development and training and flexible working hours are among the most valued benefits. How have you
Mm.
seen employers tailoring these benefits offering to meet expectations across the different generations?
Yeah, I think it's interesting because we talk about benefits, and we kind of do this perks thing, and what do we want? And part of the conversation that has been quite traditional around Gen Z, particularly, is like all they want is like the top job, and they want big salaries and da da da. And I think we need to make sure that all of the hygiene factors are in place first. It's not necessarily that Gen Z are looking for big salaries. They are looking for value. So they want to be valued for the work that they're doing, the contribution that they're making. And cost of living is high. Like, let's be real here. So they need to be able to be paid for the work that they're doing. So is it any wonder that they are focused on some, remuneration and making sure that they're fairly remunerated? So as far as like perks and stuff is concerned, there's all sorts of different things that are happening, and I haven't really seen anything that exciting or that unique. I must say, it's the usual things. What I do know about particularly Gen Z, I think are really driving this, is the ability to have true flexibility in work. So not just about, having a work from home policy or a work remote policy. It's really about, how can I flex up and down in my work? How can I do my work in a different way? How can I bring more innovation into my work? I know in my workplace, particularly, we've got a lot of people in the Gen Z area, and they're just, basically working in this AI space and have just jumped straight into it. Like, they haven't even like hesitated. They haven't even thought about, why would I use it, or what's all the things that we need? Where's the policies around it? It's like, no, okay, how can I do this? I can get my job done faster. I can get better outcomes. I can do what I need to do. So being able to allow them that flexibility of approach is super important as well. We know that Gen Z want to learn, and they just want to learn and grow, and that's something that they're really interested in. So being able to provide an environment of learning, so not just providing them a budget to go and spend and go to a conference, yeah, great, that might be of interest to them, or to do a course, yeah, absolutely, that might be of interest to them. But actually creating an environment of learning is much better, particularly when we go back to talking about our management and retention stuff. That's what they're looking for. They're looking for the ability to learn, and particularly learn on the job. They want to be mentored, but not in a, I'm going to make a time once a fortnight to have a coffee with somebody, blah, blah, blah. It's the in the moment stuff. I want to ask a question now. I want to send you a Teams or a Slack or whatever, and just ask a question. Can you just help me with this? They want to be able to get that sort of instant learning and instant, almost instant access, because they can get that anywhere. They can go straight onto YouTube, right? They can go straight onto social media. They're used to instant access. So it's less about giving perks, more about building an environment where they can learn, where they can be flexible, where they can have meaningful interactions with people and interactions with a learning outcome.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with everything that you've just said.
Yeah.
So in terms of millennials then, so they do still
Mm.
represent the largest cohort in the workforce. So what are the most effective ways that you've seen clients engage in this group amid shifting expectations around salary and well-being?
Yeah. So what I've noticed with millennials is there is quite a spectrum of millennials as well. So you've got your millennials that are more closely aligned to your Gen X's, and you've got your millennials that are more closely aligned to your Gen Zs. And I think it's a really interesting thing to think about, that is a spectrum of experience. And many millennials have older brothers and sisters who are from your Gen X generation and have learnt from them, right? So they've got the same kind of approaches. What I noticed is that it was really the millennials that kicked off this real desire for work-life integration. So I think the Gen Xers kind of came into the workplace and went, we want work-life balance, and we want to be able to do things outside of our work, and do our work over here. Whereas millennials really kicked off that idea around integrating work and life. So it's not two separate things, it's part of the same. And Gen Z are taking that to a whole new level as well. So I think one of the things when engaging with millennials, it's recognizing that integration, but also recognizing the spectrum, that there are going to be many millennials that are younger and really desire that true flexibility, the same as the Gen Zs. But there's also going to be a group of millennials that still have some of those old-fashioned views around, how work happens and what they get out of work, and so we need to see the diversity within just the generations as well. I think one of the things that I have really noticed, though, with millennials moving into management positions, particularly because I work mostly with management and senior execs, is that they are bringing a different type of communication strategy and style to leadership. And it's much more collaborative, which I think is just a really amazing place to go. What I find is the quickest way to disengage a millennial leader is to take away their ability to be part of their team and to engage with their team. So when others are shutting them down, particularly, we work a lot in change and organizational change. So if a millennial manager is being shut down as far as they're not allowed to share specific information about the change with their team, they're not allowed to engage their team early in creation of the change, this is one way. If you want to disengage a millennial manager, that's a quick way of going about doing it. So I think what that is saying to me is that element of collaborative leadership, collaborative communication, the ability to work together to design things and deliver value is so important for your millennials, because that's what they're looking for. Like, they're looking for their life to be part of their work and vice versa. So if I'm going to get meaning from work, work kind of needs to be meaningful. So I think that's one of the things that I'm noticing the most.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. And when you were talking around the spectrum of millennials and some being closer to Gen Z and some being close to Gen X, I feel like from a personal experience, I think also between me and my partner, he's probably a little bit more old school, but I don't know if that's industry, because he's more construction,
Mm,
so doesn't
yeah.
think that you should have as much flexibility. But I think that's sometimes where you've kind of developed your skill set from as well. So
Yeah.
yeah, so it's interesting to see different people's perspectives within the generations as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, one other element that I'm noticing is, like, on that collaborative space, is also moving more towards the team-based performance outcomes and team-based performance measures. Uh, and that is generally more the younger, I say younger, but let's call it more contemporary managers are the ones that are looking at things from the point of view of team-based performance, rather than, that sort of model of, everybody has to have KPIs and everybody has to be measured individually, and which to me actually creates more competition than it does collaboration. So, it's I am Gen
Yeah.
X and identify as Gen Z, so I just put that out there too.
Love it. Oh, well, thank you so much, Michelle. So, what we're going to do now is we're going to bring both of you back on screen. So, we're going to bring Maja back, just so that we can get a broader view and some different
Great.
perspectives from the market. So, um, I'll start with my first question and I'll take this over to you, Maja, first. So, what has been the most surprising shift in expectations between Gen Z and baby boomers that you've seen in the last 12 months?
Yeah, before I answer that, I just want to say I was listening to all of that, and Michelle 100% agree with. Like, I was just deeply nodding over here. So thank you as well. Super aligned with a lot of the stuff that you're saying, and I think 100% spot on. Probably the biggest surprise for me in terms of some of the expectations or even the preferences that I've seen. And it has really happened over the last sort of 12 months, because I think post-COVID, when we first went into figuring out what this ways of working was going to be, it probably wasn't as acute. I guess we didn't see it as much, is how much Gen Z in many ways are actually leading some of the return back to the office. Which, if we kind of go there, digital natives, they absolutely know everything online. Some of the data and some of the research that we've been seeing, and we saw it from Swinburne, did a piece of research where we could see that from a percentage perspective of how many are going back into the office 5 days a week versus the boomers, more Gen Zs are going in 5 days a week than the boomers are. Which was a complete surprise, I have to admit, in many ways that sort of saw that. And when we started unpacking that, I think the reality of what we see is, yes, they absolutely prefer digital communication and they're native in that. But I think, what I'm 100% convinced of, and especially because I've been doing a lot of work with UNSW, University of New South Wales here, is Gen Z are still absolutely just as ambitious as any generation was. And they are very much wanting to do well and learn and everything else. And I think they're realizing that trying to do that remotely is difficult. It's hard, especially because a lot of organizations haven't updated how they do that onboarding and the training and everything else. So being in the office is actually a really good way to learn. And so they are balancing that. I'm not saying that they want to be in the office 5 days a week. You've seen that in your preferences, in your data. We see that in terms of preferences themselves. They absolutely want to be, I think it was 2 days a week that you found, and 2 to 3 days is that sort of working from home sweet spot. But they are valuing the ability to go and then having hopefully someone be there to help them do that. Where I think the boomers are, again, I do a lot of work with sort of mentoring groups of CEOs, and they're Gen X and boomers mostly. Over the last 2 to 3 years, they've had to get used to this whole working from home and the boundaries and everything else. but they are starting to see the benefits of them as well. And more, I guess I'm seeing a lot of people were trying to figure out, what does retirement and transition to retirement look like? And could it look like differently than it had in the past, that I work and then I don't work? Could I start working 2 to 3 days a week only and take on part-time? And so that shift in terms of flexibility and how they're taking on flexibility and looking at it has been a surprise, at least for me.
Yeah, nice. Did you want to add
So
anything on there,
interesting.
Michelle?
Oh, I think that that's absolutely spot on, is what I'm seeing as well, and I think that real flex of going, I do want to be able to work remotely, but I also want to work with people because I want to learn. I want to learn with people. So being able to come back into the office, not when you're telling me to, but when it's working for us, that is really important. I can see that as well. Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point on what's happening, to that flex stuff. It's
Yeah,
really
definitely.
interesting.
I think we've seen it as well. Like when, especially you got the experience of it during COVID when everyone was working from home, and you saw people who were
Mm,
entering the workforce, their development really slowed down, because
mm,
as you mentioned, Maya, the ecosystem that's set up isn't set up for people to be trained from home. So it's kind of an out of
mm,
sight, out of mind kind of thing, where you're not being pulled into meetings, you're not doing the listening, like what you mentioned earlier as well, Michelle. Like you're not getting that environment around you for your development. So yeah,
yeah.
we've definitely seen that. So I think, as you mentioned, DenZ have picked up on that as well. So they're
Mm,
looking
mm,
for those career opportunities. Um, on to our next question. So with 71% of employees valuing career development training, but learning preferences varying widely across each of the age group, what approaches are you seeing to design inclusive L&D programs that meet generational needs? And I'll go to you first, Michelle.
mm. Sure. Yeah, I think this has been quite an interesting exploration for us as an organization, because we do quite a lot of learning and development training with our clients. And what we've noticed, which kind of surprised me a little bit, is the real thirst for face to face. Like in-person learning, and I think it is that collaborative learning and being able to um, learn together, which seems to be really desired by all the generations, not just the sort of the younger generational need. So everyone who's wanting to learn, they seem to be wanting to learn together. There still is a self-driven learning aspect to online learning that I'm noticing, but I'm less and less seeing that now, and more getting requests for face to face. Like, can we do that face to face, or can we actually go off site and do something? We really want to be together. Can we do some fun stuff as well as learning? So I think people they lose this sense of togetherness and just that human connection when you're doing everything online, or in a hybrid kind of way. That's still happening. Absolutely. Of course it is, because it's super convenient for organizations, and particularly if they've got virtual teams, then being able to do learning virtually has been something that's been really important. But I think we got quite saturated with online during the COVID pandemic, and during that period of time, I think we were saturated as well, because organizations went, this is great, we can do it all online, costs us less money, we can get it done quickly, tick that box. Whereas people are really thirsting for that high engagement during sessions, being able to collaboratively learn. So yeah, we're doing a lot more. We're printing more things and having people write in books more than we have in ages. So it's shifting in that direction again.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And Maya, was there anything extra you wanted to add in?
No, I think it just, sorry, yes, but very much agreeing with, not in any different to what Michelle is sort of saying. I think there's definitely a thirst for face-to-face. I do think, though, the organizations are trying to kind of do two things at once. And what I mean by that is they are using the opportunity of learning together to actually create moments of connection inside the organization, especially for those that are distributed or that are hybrid, because we're wanting more and more of that. I think also we have to just aware, I mean, learning overall has developed and changed over time, right? The whole full instruction that maybe Gen X and baby boomers were used to, which is almost that like lecture style learning. We've learned over time that that doesn't really work very well anyways, that has to be supplemented with, experiential learning and mentoring and the practice and all kinds of other things. So for me, the answer to all of this really is blended learning. Yes, let's have some digital online stuff, but that's just replacing that lecture style information sharing, which we know when you're designing learning environments for adults, period, of any generation, it has to really be heavily experiential, which then, will actually break down some of the barriers that we're really worried about, right? Because if people are working together, they're getting to know each other, they're relating to each other on a human to human basis, we have a much more kind of cohesive experience anyway. So I would just sort of say blend it kind of thing and figure out what you're replacing for what overall.
Brilliant. So moving on to our next question. So intergenerational friction can sometimes arise around feedback styles and communication norms. So what tools or frameworks are you seeing organizations use to promote generational cohesion?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. And when I was sort of thinking about that, I'm not sure that I've had, and Michelle, I'd love for you to sort of share if you have any specific clients that are kind of coming at it from this intergenerational perspective, I guess, or lens. But the number one thing is, I think, really feedback styles overall, or feedback overall is just always been a little bit of a thing that, we get a lot of return on our investment of time and effort to do it, but really it's one of those things that we know most leaders really struggle with, and even we as organizations and people struggle with. So the number one intervention for me that I've seen organizations put in is one, really creating a culture of connection and really building the bonds inside the organization, inside the team, and that then driving psychological safety that is almost like a relational bank account, so we can have the hard conversations, right? But also it builds that understanding that we are slightly different and we might have slightly different values, whatever that means, whether that's generational or some other way. It could be cross-cultural, it could be neurodiversity, it could be all kinds of things, really. So for me, it's how do we promote that understanding and connection amongst our teams so we can have a culture of feedback and candor and all that other stuff that we want to have there. And the other thing that I would say, I'm a big believer, if you want to do that, then it's about building it into your systems. And Michelle, that's why I was nodding so much when you were talking about systems. The engineering me is always going to have that. Whatever you want to do, whoever you want to be, you need to operationalize that. So if we're doing that, and going back to Kirsty, what you're sharing about how everybody wants to provide feedback, we need to have systems for real-time on-the-go feedback. And that's like every client meeting, what are the 3 questions that we ask? How do we do? What did we do well? What could we do better, right? That happens every meeting. We're learning and we're becoming safe with it. And also then going back to the answer in the first one-on-ones, right? So we're having a little bit more of that formality that some of the Gen Xers and baby boomers might need. But still, if we're doing it regularly, I think it's as close as we can to real time the Gen Z would be. So those would be my 2 things. But Michelle, I don't know if you found that anyone's done it from a generational perspective.
Yeah, I'm not really seeing it from that perspective, other than maybe building more of those, like you were talking about earlier, the younger generations want instant, like they want it now, like don't wait for a month to give me feedback, I just want to know now. So I am seeing more of that actually happening, which is making, many managers very uncomfortable that they have to give this feedback all the time. But I think the majority of things that we need to be thinking about and doing in this space is making sure that feedback is just part of our work. Like it is absolutely just part of our work. Like you were saying there, is that we do these, reviews at the end of what we're doing. We are always constantly providing feedback. We're always reviewing our own work and making sure that we're, getting the best out of ourselves. There was interesting, I just wanted to just give you a little insight into something that happened with us the other day. We've got a new employee that came through from another organization. She's absolutely fabulous. And she said to me, she's like, oh, Dan, who's my business partner and the CEO, called me into the office, said, I want to give you some feedback. She said, my stomach dropped and my heart dropped. And I was like, oh God. And she said, and then he gave me all this really positive feedback. Like he was telling me all these great things that I was doing. And she said, but like that word feedback just really triggered me. And I was just like, wow, that's so interesting. Because we definitely have a culture of feedback, for every purpose. And it's in the moment. We're constantly talking to each other about what went well, what didn't go well. But even like thinking about it, and she's, sort of mid to late 20s, so in that sort of older Gen Z, I guess, is I think where she's situated. That word feedback was a trigger for her. And I was like, oh wow, I think we still have some work to do in that space, that we're seeing feedback as something negative. But I just thought it was quite funny when she's like, oh, and he gave me all this positive stuff. I'm like, yeah, feedback can be that too. I get it though. Sometimes it's an F word.
So in terms of next question. So in terms of what adjustments are you seeing to EVP or job advertising strategies to better target Gen Z, millennials, or more experienced hires?
Yeah, do you want me to kick off?
Go on, Michelle. You can take it.
Yeah, right. So I'm actually interested in learning from Maja on this one as well, because I'm not seeing a lot of difference in job advertising or EVPs, maybe just the language that's being used. But I did have a little story that I wanted to tell you, because it was it was kind of a mirror for me as well. But I was talking with a potential client about retaining and attracting Gen Z, particularly into his workforce. He ran an advertising company, so clearly there was a burning platform to get the future buyers into his workforce, so that he was they were doing things in a different way. And I was sitting there and I was looking at him and I was listening to what he was saying, and I was asking, well, why don't you think that people are being attracted to your organization? And he was like, I don't know, we're advertising, so we're doing all the right thing. They come and they apply for the jobs, and then we interview them, and then they're just gone. But because they're not loyal, and they just want to travel, and they just want to be a CEO, and they don't work like we work. And I was like, oh dude, like I can see you're not able to attract your that talent, because it's got nothing to do with your job ads, and it's got nothing to do with your EVP. It's actually to do with how you're turning up in the conversations that you're having with a generation of people that are looking for support, and they're looking for flexibility, and they're looking for you to be contemporary in your leadership and your thinking. They're looking for you to be diverse in your thinking. And guess what? You're showing me that you're not. So it's really interesting that I'm finding that it's probably less about the language and the written documentation, and more about how leaders are actually turning up in conversations to attract people into their businesses.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
So go on, Maja.
Definitely. I think that's we so reap what we sow when it comes to that. And the more we show up the way, the more we treat people a certain way, the more we're going to get a specific type of behavior back. The only thing that I was going to share in terms of EVP, a couple of my clients that have sort of done some really good work on this have just done a lot of listening. And rather than making assumptions about what is it that needs to be communicated and in which way and all that kind of other stuff, they've actually gone and asked a lot of, and this is now specifically the examples that I have are around those who wanted to attract Gen Z, more Gen Z employees, because that was specifically, they were looking at their succession plans and everything else. So, after a couple of good hires, they would go, okay, so what is it about here that you like? And what is it about that? I mean, we can look at generalizations, and we know that, really, ultimately, this is just that basics is like, who is the audience we're communicating to, what's important to them. We have tons of research about, what does Gen Z sort of look at, Gen Z millennials, whether that's values and purpose, and some of that diversity is really, really important. And then also just playing around as to where we're communicating to them, right? And knowing that they will absolutely look at our social media and look at where that is. By the way, for Gen Z, it's not always going to be LinkedIn. Like, they all talk about LinkedIn like it's the most fake place in the world. Like, it's actually really fascinating. They know they have to play there, but they don't really trust it. Where they would probably talk about, going on Instagram, TikTok, even better. So depending on your size and whether you have the budget to play around with those kinds of things, if that's the areas where you're going to look for, specifically look for those employees, then I would do that. I would play with it.
Yeah, it's really interesting because it goes back to what you were saying earlier, Maja, as well, around the authenticity. So they want the videos to be authentic, whereas I do find that on LinkedIn, everyone's so structured in terms of what they want to put out there, and you're trying to create an image that sometimes isn't even you. So it's not. I can see why it's not a place that they want to show up, but have to show up if they want to be playing within that workforce for now. But eventually they're going to be the managers, and they're going to be the ones that will be running on the platforms as well. So really, really interesting. Final question then. So while many companies are developing mentorship programs where boomers or Gen X mentor Gen Z, are you seeing a reverse mentoring or cross-generational exchanges being implemented?
It's a really interesting question. And I'll be honest, only one of my clients has something in place. They are a large multinational bank. And the thing that they've been playing around with the last little while, and through some of the programs that we've been involved with them, was a shadow board option. So it's not a formal mentoring like, Gen Z to Gen X or whatever situation, but it's more looking at getting the younger employees, the more junior employees, to act as a shadow board to some of the senior managing directors inside the organization, and then provide them feedback. So how are the decisions being made? What are we missing? And things like that. And I think when we originally sort of started playing around with some of these ideas and speaking to their HR team, they were looking at some of the, there were case studies and things like that where organizations have, when they were struggling to go after that demographic, let's say in brands and everything else, that shadow board situation really, really helped. For them, they were just seeing the fact that who was getting promoted inside their organization was a very, let's say, stock standard type of personality. They wanted more diversity, and they wanted to kind of see what is it about how they operate and their senior leadership operates that sort of seems to make a lot of people opt out from that. So that's one specific client of mine. But I know that organizations like PwC, KPMG, the RBA, and I think Herbert, I always get their name wrong, so I wrote it down, Herbert Smith Freehills, they have that as well. It's still something that I think a lot of organizations, and I've done a little bit of sort of just asking around, it's not as utilized probably as much as it needs to be. I would probably say that the more informal mentoring side of things, where again, going back to how we build some of those bridges, is starting to become important, especially with the rise of AI, where I'm seeing organizations where within teams, like young people are all of a sudden leading the conversation and the training inside teams. They're like, right, this is what we're going to do with this tool and this tool and this tool. And the older generations are like, please teach me, like, what do I do? Because we desperately know that we have to learn. So some of that informal stuff is probably happening a little bit more.
Brilliant. And Michelle, anything to add on there?
Yeah, I'm probably the same. It's more the informal things that I'm seeing. I'm not really seeing a lot of, formalized reversed, or what they call reverse mentoring. But I think one of the things that I have noticed, because the work that we do primarily is in organizational change, so pulling together a change team and a project team to actually deliver an outcome, what I am noticing more of is a deliberate design of those teams, and looking at the subject matter experts, particularly from across the board. So previously it was, project team comes together, subject matter expert, pretty much the person in the team that's got the most capacity goes onto the team, and away we go. But now I'm really noticing a lot more where they're being much more deliberate in the people that they're picking, and they're looking for a diversity of people from different lived experiences. So across the generations, across diversity, across different lived experiences, which is giving them way better outcomes, and particularly their outcomes when it comes to the change part of the project, not just the technical part of the project. That's what I'm noticing the most. So it is, the cross generations are learning together on a particular project, like with an actual outcome that they're trying to achieve together. So there's this real collaborative stuff that's happening. The other thing that I've noticed, which I think is really a cool thing, and it kind of goes to the societal aspect, is generally what I'm seeing is Gen Z and baby boomers seem to be getting along better than any of the other generations, it seems to be. And I don't know if it's, I'm chatting with grandma and I love my grandma, so I'm, hanging out with the older generation, or what it is, if that's, part of it. But I'm noticing that more and more. The other thing I'm noticing, which is, a reflection on my own generation, is the ones that are standing in the way the most are the Gen Xers. So I'm really noticing that, and that is kind of upsetting for me, being in that generation. But I think there's a lot of work still to be done in this space. But, there's a lot of work to be done making the organizations better anyway. But it's encouraging to see that there is much more good stuff that's happening than the terrible stuff that used to happen 10 or 15 years ago.
Yeah, 100%. And I'll just add one little story in there, because as you were both talking, I was like, oh, it reminds me of something. I was talking to a client the other day, and he was saying that he had a copywriter who had like 27 years experience, and they brought in one of the entry-level copywriters, and they said, right, we're going to team you up and you're going to look over each other's work. And they went away and did it. And the more experienced member of staff came to him later on, and he was like, I've never been so offended than when you told me that an entry-level person had to look over my work. However, I can't believe the difference that it's made. And he was like, what I could actually learn from that person, and what I could mentor that person as well, just from this simple idea. The manager was saying, in hindsight, I probably should have delivered it slightly differently. However, like, the outcome was there. So I think, definitely when you've got these different levels of experience, different generations coming together, you can really get like a stronger outcome from it, because you've both got different strengths.
Yeah.
Perfect. So a big thank you to you both for joining us today. I've really enjoyed our conversation, and the insights have been amazing. So if anyone watching today is wanting to reach out to get in touch with either Maja and MP Consulting, or Michelle and Synergy Energy, you can visit the comments for all the information below. So thank you again. Thanks, Maja and Michelle.
Thank you so much.
So just a reminder that all the insights shared today are based off our 2025 employment and salary trends report. So if you are looking for a deep dive into salaries, benefits, workplace trends, the market, you can request your copy by scanning the QR code on the screen now, or clicking the link in the comments below. So whether you're looking to take the next step in your career or build your team with the right talent, People Group and Frog Recruitment are here to help. We're an award-winning agency operating across Australia and the UK, with specialist teams in every major market, and we are in New Zealand as well. So here in New Zealand, we've been proudly recruiting for around 23 years through Frog Recruitment, with offices both in Auckland and Wellington. And in our South Australia, our partners at Edge Recruitment are Adelaide's go-to specialists for property, real estate and admin roles. You'll find all the contact details on the screen now, or you can just check all of the links in the comments and reach out to one of our team today. So thank you so much for joining us today, and thank you for taking the time to share with us our market update.